Hey everybody, it's Jeff. I wanted to elaborate on a message in the outro of the last episode. In case you missed it, well, I'm getting married. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast and I got engaged in the before times. And that was Yeva Johnson. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this podcast, Yeva picks up where she left off in part 1. Concluding the story of her time in Brazil before going back for 4 years of med school in Rhode Island. Of more than 170 episodes, and get to know more of your fellow San Franciscans. Also, keep looking for content on our social media channels, including wedding and possibly honeymoon photos. Thanks as always for listening. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again with new episodes in November.
Well, I just was coming for training. It's 3 years. Little did I know I would spend the rest of my life here. So I haven't left since I came. So.
She visited San Francisco on a fortuitous spring break trip, and again shortly after the 1989 earthquake. Then, in 1990, she was matched with a program at SF General Hospital and made the move out here. She says in the meantime, she had kids, she worked a lot, and she eventually discovered poetry. Yeva ends this episode reflecting on what San Francisco is and what it could become. And then she reads one of her poems, Incantation for Black Lives to Remain in Focus After the Outrage Fades. Here's Yeva.
One thing that I told you about like the different marches and peace marches and stuff. Mm-hmm. One thing that also was a big part of my growing up was our family was involved with a group that's called Children's International Summer Villages. Okay. And it's about peace, world peace. Getting kids, it's an American psychologist who started the organization back in the 50s and picked the age of 11 for kids to get to know each other before. That's an age where you're old enough to go away from home, but young enough that your prejudices haven't hardened and solidified so much. And there are these international peace camps with different kids from different countries all over. And so my mom found this thing, and so when I was 11, I was lucky enough to go to a camp in Tanzania for a month. Wow. And I did that. And that was really interesting. It's very interesting. And then those camps, they ended up, the first ones, people missed each other. They started making these reunion camps when they got. Yeah. So the reunion camps turned into a new type of camp called seminar camp for teenagers. Okay. So when I was a teenager, I went to seminar camp in France that time. I went, and I was 17, and that was a great one too. And one of my good friends was from Brazil, and whatever, it was a bilingual camp in French and English.
Okay. And, where in France was that?
It was in Semoise, which is just outside of Geneva, like way on that the side in the Alps, in that area, some little town. Yeah. So that was a 3-week camp. I just found a friend from that camp.
Recently,
we just got on a Zoom call like a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And he's from Norway.
Okay.
And we had we haven't seen each other in person since that time. We were gonna get together, but all this terrorism stuff, we were gonna meet in London years ago, but it was when the shoe bomber. It's because of the shoe bomber. Another big regret. There's my regrets, right? Okay. Don't skip a year of college. And when you get a chance to see a really good friend from Norway, forget the freaking shoe bomber and just go meet them. Because we were both had very little money. I was like, well, we'll meet up, and and we were gonna meet up, and I was like, I'm too nervous about the shoe bomber thing. I can't come. And that was like our chance. So and then we kind of lost contact. It turns out both of us are not very I was like looking for him. My sister helped me find him. She's like searching on the internet, and he's like at this school. We found this school. And I called, there was a number, I found the number.
Yes.
I call and I'm like, because a friend has her daughters went to Norway he lives way up north way up north in Norway. So I call the school and I'm like, I don't know if this guy is still there. And he has a name that's like John Smith in Norwegian. Okay.
Right.
For me, it's the only one I know with that name. So I leave this mess. I call the school. It's like Norwegian, blah, blah, blah. I think it's saying, please leave a message. So I'm like, hello, my name is this, blah, blah, blah. I hope my friend is still there. I don't, I leave this thing. I don't know if it gets through. So I don't hear anything. I've sent an email. I don't get an email. Finally, something happened where he's like, gets back. He's like, Yeva, I'm so sorry. Can we do a Zoom? So we did a Zoom call just a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
It was wonderful.
What is his first name?
Jon, which is like John.
Right.
So
that is amazing.
It's wonderful. And so I got to connect him with my friend's daughter. She's like, oh, we'll have her for lunch. We'll have her over for dinner. But it's just amazing how all this time has gone by, but it was like no time went by.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's so. You brought that up to talk about these camps. The seminar
yes.
And the camps
because so when I was in Brazil, so get us back to Brazil. So I had done that camp when I was 17 in France.
Okay.
When I was in Brazil, I was on staff at a camp in Brazil.
Okay.
For one of these seminar camps.
Okay.
So that was a really it's been one of those.
So eventually you left Brazil. Did
Yes.
you go back to Providence or?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was my junior year.
Okay.
And then there's the skipping the year of college. So I started medical school right after I got back from Brazil.
Okay.
And that was like, I had a shock of like, first to get back to the States, where in Bahia at that time, there were things like the grocery stores. They didn't always have all different kinds of food the way we're used to our grocery stores here, having everything stocked all the time. So you'd see what was available and you'd get whatever. So I was just overwhelmed to see the way we have such an abundance of, we have such an abundance here, and we might not realize it until we go somewhere else. So I was going through all that, but then I started medical school, and that's
like a 4-year. Was it what people think of medical school as being? A lot of work, very intense.
Yeah. Medical school was very intense.
Yeah.
It was very intense. Up to that time in college, because I had already been accepted, you just had to have a B average. I just enjoyed myself and just have fun.
Okay.
And I got by. I feel a little guilty, but I got by. And I had a B average and I had fun. Yeah. So medical school is like a sink or swim. I did not have good study habits. I had to develop them. That's when I developed study habits in medical school.
Okay.
It's a very painful process if you do it then. That's why I say I was not a pre-med. A lot of people at pre-med, they're always studying. I didn't have to do all that. So I was a total fish out of water, not really. But
did you enjoy it? Is there any enjoying medical school?
It was really intense. I almost quit the first year. I almost was like, this is not. And there was one particular professor who I won't name, but very traditional, very old school, very sexist, misogynistic.
Okay.
It was just very intense and failed a lot of people. It was just whatever.
Nasty.
But I had a couple really good friends from medical. It's intense and you're changing, right? Your whole whatever. It's a process you go through.
Well, they say that the brain isn't fully formed until 25 or so. Isn't that right?
This is before.
Before that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it's if I knew about it, I don't know if I would have done it. Or I might have done something else, or I might have, I always secretly would have wanted to be an English teacher. So, there you go.
Right. Also words. That's
words.
Getting us back to
there's words.
Words and literature.
I worked on a newspaper.
In college or?
Well, I did in college. I worked on a newspaper a little bit. It was hard. There was I don't know if that was a socialist. It was called The Rake.
Okay.
And that was fun. That was a fun paper. I learned a little bit on, it was the old days, so this typesetting, you had to set the type and do the printing and do the strips of columns and glue them and stuff. But I was also like really procrastinating and doing. Only did a couple articles. I didn't do too much.
Okay.
Then we started a paper called "What's Up, Doc?" in med school. But just more like a little newsletter. But that was
what kids
fun.
might call a zine.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Love it.
So, but it was hard that only to the extent that studying allows. So, but so there was always some kind of writing or music going on, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
I still played in the orchestra in med school.
Oh wow!
Just
still playing flute
for the first year.
Yes.
Then it gets to be, you just can't. And once you go into the clinical, it's just like, in those days, it was like those 24-hour and thing. They didn't have limits on hours. It was before that lawsuit thing happened.
Right.
So.
Where it's like, then even after that, it's still brutal.
Yeah. And we were talking, I think we talked before that when I started med school, it was just as HIV was starting to become known. Okay. It wasn't known right when I started, at least not in Providence. It was in the 80s, Okay. So that was like that was really major. That was the thing at the time. It was very hard.
And did that have anything to do with your move out here? What was it that brought you out here?
What brought me out was probably it was in med school. I was one of a small number of out queer people in my med school class, very small. And some of us, and not just med school, but from college age, we came to San Francisco for a spring break.
Oh, yes.
And it was so much fun.
Yeah.
So much fun.
So that would have been also early 80s, late 70s?
Yeah. It was in the 80s. It was mid-80s.
Already
like,
80s,
probably around, I don't know, probably around 87, something like that. Maybe 87, 88.
I do love to hear people's first visits to San Francisco too. Do you want to talk about that
one,
trip?
So I came, it's probably, I don't know. I think there were like 5 or 7 of us or something. There was somebody who had been at Brown who lived here, and then a bunch of us came from Providence. And I don't. It was spring break, so we just came for a week. Armistead Maupin, remember him?
Yes.
So one of our friends was from North Carolina. And we talked, and was like, so that's some of, getting back to the beginning and origins and stuff, non-literary now, but going to cuisine. Okay. This friend that's from North Carolina, and he said, let's have a poor white trash dinner. He's like, he came from a poor white trash background. Okay. But we realized in talking, the food, soul food and poor white trash food, it's very similar. A lot of overlap. Food. Like we were talking, and we're like, let's just have this thing. And then, Tales of the City, they hadn't all been written by then, but we had read some, and it was like, and we were so excited.
That was kind of your impression of life in San Francisco.
So we're like, we're here, and we decided to have this poor white trash dinner. And we're like, let's call him up and invite him to come over.
You could do things like that.
They had phone books. They had phone books. He was listed. Oh, wow. We did call him. We talked to him. And I saw him at a book reading just a couple years ago, and I let him know because he was like, oh, I kind of vaguely remember, because he was just about to go to Paris, or he was off somewhere and he couldn't come. But we had this fun time talking to him, and we had this meal we cooked. I made fried chicken. We made we had mashed potatoes, we had biscuits, we had greens, we had all this stuff, and we had dozens of people. They were like, I don't know, 30, 50 people came. Wow. All queer people come. Yes. And there was somebody there who'd been a vegetarian for like 15 years. Oh. Broke. Just because that was the best chicken ever. Like, they changed. Exactly. It was like, oh my gosh. So, anyway, it was fun. That was my first time to San Francisco.
I love it. Did you talk to Armistead on the phone?
I did not. I did not talk to him directly.
But you were there.
I was right there on the phone, because whoever was talking to him was like, oh, you can't tell. I'm sorry, you can't come, so.
Did that add to the kind of, mystique is probably the wrong word, but just the excitement of this place?
Oh, it was fun. But also for us at the time. So that Tales of the City, though, that the way it was, for us coming from Providence, there are a lot of similarities. And you're not in San Francisco, but you're in Providence. You're having all these kind of adventures, and you're leading a fun, queer life of young people. So you can really identify with that. So it was just fun. It was totally blast. So I always had a positive feeling about San Francisco. So when it came time I decided to go into family medicine because I like older people, I like younger people, I like babies, I like everybody. And so, and I thought they were the nicest people of the specialties, but I learned later they're nice people in every specialty. So,
right.
But that was my thought when I first went out there. But I wanted to do work with underserved populations. So I ended up interviewing different places: Chicago, the Bronx. I went to DC, or usually urban underserved places, and I interviewed at San Francisco General, and I really liked that program. So that's you. When you out of med school, once you decide the specialty and you figure out and you get your interviews, you rank. There's a ranking system. And you rank them, and the programs rank the people, and then they have a match. So you just get your match. So I was lucky to match. Your
match was SF General.
Yeah, I was really lucky to match her.
And were you? What did you think of that? Like, you had this one experience here, but now you could come here. And start a career?
I was very happy. Well, I wasn't thinking. Well, I just was coming for training.
Okay.
It's 3 years.
Okay.
Little did I know I would spend the rest of my life here. So I haven't left since I came.
What year was that?
That was in 1990.
1990. Oh, you let the earthquake happen, and then you're like, okay, now it's good.
Oh yeah. So the earthquake, the earthquake happened on a Tuesday, and I had tickets to come already on Friday because I was doing some kind of interview, and one of my friends from the France peace camp, who is from Brazil, was going to be in California, and it was like this whole, like, the pictures we got in Providence were like, you know, they showed the way they show it on the news, like, so horrible. Like, was the runway broken down? You know, I was like, I'm calling. I was like, I've got to go. You don't understand. I was like, so I did go. I came to San Francisco, but the weirdest thing, I was always on Muni or something for every aftershock. Like, I didn't feel a thing. Like, there was an aftershock, and she was like, no. I was always on the bus. I didn't notice anything.
Like, was that a pothole?
But I saw some damage. You know, I saw a little bit,
right.
or whatever. There were cab drivers in those days.
Yep.
And they would take you around, show you stuff. You know, but
like Earthquake Safari.
Really? They just
Never
did
heard
that. Like, yeah, they would just.
Interesting.
But, you know, it was the first week. They were like, look at this, you know, because it was a shock. So for years afterward, the thing that got me was about the Bay Bridge.
Yeah.
So I always, like, if there was traffic, like, or, you know, there's they took it down now, but there's an overpass that's on Geary Boulevard. Yeah. And I would always, like, it's like, if there's any overpasses, I would just stop before that, because, like, if there's an earthquake, I don't want to be crushed. That was just, like, my worst. Like, I don't want to be crushed. I don't want to fall in my car into the bay. I just don't want that. That was, like, my worst. We saw those images on TV. Yeah, and it was just like, oh no. So I was like that for years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you moved here in '90.
Yeah.
Not knowing that you were going to stay.
Yeah.
I think that's another kind of part of the moving here story for those of us who are still here. It's like, you don't always know you're going to stay. You're just, you know, you're going to this place and you're drawn there for whatever reason. A lot of us, it's the same or similar reasons. But and now it's like 30. You know, 30 years is a long time.
Oh, you want the 30 years? 30 years. Let me tell you the highlights of the 30 years, though. I did my training, very intense. I met my partner there, who now we're separated, but you know, we had kids.
Okay.
And but first we just worked and had a good time, and working. I had to pay all my loans off and all that kind of stuff. But I've been working a lot. When you work as the type of jobs I've worked with underserved populations, I've always kind of worked a lot of extra hours to really take care of people. You have to put in. You just give that time.
Right.
And so for that reason, I feel very. I'm working on a manuscript I was just working on this morning it's called Analog Poet Blues. Okay. And I'm very analog. I'm very old school. It's as if I still am back from the 80s, because a lot's happened. And if you work in these settings, underserved setting, we had floppy disks for the longest time when other stuff was happening. And I'm a late adopter, and I just turned out to not be really too much into social media, internet, and all that. But anyway,
it's lovely to hear.
I have kids. The kids are now college and just finished college.
Right.
So that's sort of, that speeds you through, like, a lot's gone on. You know, I always wanted to go to public health school, and I ended up going back to school back in 2007, 2008.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because there was that economic downturn,
Yes.
I got partially laid off from work. So I went to Berkeley to get an MPH, and I worked part-time because it was a difficult time then.
Yeah, it was.
But it was so fascinating. I did an MPH in epidemiology at Berkeley, and it was so interesting because they had data sets of the HIV positive population in San Francisco. And I
wow.
realized, like, my TA, who was like this brilliant grad student, then I realized, like, I was older person. I was like in my 40s going to this thing, and they're talking about this thing, and I realized these are actual people. And I might have known some of the, I start crying in the middle of class because I realized, like, these are like, I was there at the, they have, did you see this documentary about 5A?
I haven't seen it yet. No, I've heard about it.
You should see that.
Yeah.
That was like, they're the nurses who are in this. There are people they were so kind to me. Like, I know these people. They were so kind to me.
A lot of them are still around too.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so, anyway, it was just an interesting time. So that gives you sort of a broad thing. I think, anyway, it's a broad thing. But the one thing I forgot to let you know about, way back, unfortunately, in high school, I had a very difficult teacher who said something to me that really crushed any thought I had about doing writing. Because he's like, you're a terrible writer. It's just horrible.
One of those charmers.
And so I never took an English class in Brown. You could take anything you want.
Right.
I never took an English class. I was interested. I used to write poetry as a child. My dad wrote poetry, and I just, like, never did it until a friend who I was working with at Liquid Honda, where I work, got me into. She wrote a book and got an award for poetry, and I was like, oh, and I went to her talk, and we got to chatting. She's like, you seem really creative. You should get into this. And I was like, oh, no. And I waited 2 years, and I said, could you help me get started? And she helped me get started.
How long ago was that?
That was 6.5 years ago.
Oh, is that all?
Yes, that is all. That's why I'm new. I'm emerging. So,
I'm so surprised
Yeah.
because I've seen you perform and
Yeah.
speak your poetry. I never would have thought you started that recently.
So that's when I
Never.
started. I just started.
Wow.
When you saw me,
Wow.
that's probably when I started doing readings. I just started that around 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where our lives intertwine.
Yes.
Okay, Yeva, thank you so much for all of that. Can we end with a little old thing? Our theme this year on the show is We're Still Here. We've spoken about it a little bit.
Yeah.
You 31 years.
Yeah.
I've been here coincidentally 21.
Okay.
But and Michelle 22. Anyway, coming out of economic turmoil, a pandemic, a social and racial uprising, what I'll just go ahead and say tech has done to this city in the last decade or so. We think it's remarkable, the people who are still here. There's still a vibrant community. There's still people such as yourself in both art and medical professions who are people who are, working to make this a better place and doing that daily work and making it also just a more interesting, a more loving, a more accepting kind of place. I'm editorializing. That's my take on it. But I want to hear your thoughts, your feelings about this San Francisco. Maybe I know we're not by any means out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
We're not by any means out of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But we're at an inflection point, I believe.
Yeah.
I just love to know your
well,
thoughts.
it's it's hard. So I've been 30 years. I interestingly, when I first came, and I came from Providence, so it was a shock. Like, it's so expensive here.
Yeah.
And
Even in 90.
Even in 90, because I had come from I used to pay $400 for a 3-bedroom apartment in Providence, and then people were like laughing, But you could pay at that time. You could pay $800 for a 2-bedroom apartment here, right? But that was like really expensive. So,
and work 2 or 3 jobs to pay for it.
Yeah, or or whatever. You do what you need to do.
Yep.
And, but it was more reasonable though. It was more reasonable back then. I do remember like the first .com thing that happened, because we ended up buying a property.
Oh. In the city?
In the city years ago. But at that time, it was way more money than we ever thought.
Right.
And it was kind of a rundown, and it was way out where like everything was happening sort of. I used to live in the Mission.
Oh.
and I went to some.
Where about? I have to ask. Because I
Right,
did too.
oh, right near the post office at near 20.
South Van Ness and
South-
23rd?
uh-huh.
22nd?
Right around there. Right
yeah,
around
okay.
there.
No, I was at 20th and Mission.
Oh, okay.
Not
So, but in those days, well, whatever. When I started reading, somebody was talking, a local poet who's well known about, there's a lot, people talk a lot about getting gentrified out of the Mission, what's happened in the Mission. And I realized for him, it was 20 years ago, right? And I was feeling all sorry for him. But then it was like 15 years ago or something. Then I was like, wait a minute,
That's what
lived in the
happened.
Mission. I lived there 20 years ago, and that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. But I think but then I moved way out by the ocean where it used to be like, oh, we'd work on microclimes, right? Who's going to live in the foggy when you can live in the sun in the Mission,
Right.
But actually, there's all kind of people living out in the avenues, which I used to be all snooty about, but I moved to the avenues, and it's great, right? And that's where the regular people lived in the avenues until the buses started coming out the neighborhood too, but things are always changing.
Yes.
The place always changes, but there are always people here, and there always have been, I think. And, and the people who've been here before all these people came back in the 1840s, there's been people here all along, and those people, there are just waves and waves, and there are people who stay from all the waves. And so that's there's something about this area. I for a little while, because I don't live in the avenues anymore, and I was trying to go to Oakland, but Oakland had already, it was like too late. Oakland's so inexpensive. No way. It's not affordable. So they're just waves. They're just waves of things. And I remember things like the Bay Bridge. I don't know if you remember this, but it used to cost $1 to go. And then they were like, when they raised it to $2, they promised it would be for 2 years, and then they would turn it back. I was like,
did they say that?
Oh, of course. No, you don't know. These are things. Like, of course.
And then
each time,
that.
we're going to this, or, they
man.
close these housing projects. Oh, they're going to let people come back. Oh, they didn't do, there's stuff. The city is like that, but there are people who do stay, who hang on, or it's enlarged. It's not all about San Francisco anymore.
Right.
It's about the Bay Area. I think it's about the Bay Area. That lifeblood is in the Bay Area, and I have like strong connections, because there are people always moving out different places, but there's some coming back. But there is something linking that Bay Area, that spirit of creativity, of people doing stuff, of people interested in social justice and all kinds of activities, of people reaching out across different types of potential barriers. I think that is still a thing, and I'm really grateful to be living in an area like that, and where we can meet over Zoom and meet amazing poets and storytellers and musicians and multi-talented people in so many areas. I've seen all these amazing teachers people who do all kinds of hybrid type stuff they're doing. It's fantastic, and so I love
your analogy of waves. I mean, it's poetic, but it's also a great just a basic analogy, and it makes a lot of sense because of the type of environment we live in.
Yeah.
I think it's also, I think there's, and this definitely goes back, but a lot of humans who come here and I think respond to the place itself because it is such a beautiful and unique physical place, and you can't help but be kind of captivated and then respond to it.
It is beautiful. Although I never, in my day, it was like the droughts were happening, but for a while there was still rainy season and dry season. But now I feel like we have dry season and fire season. And it's just so awful. It's but there's a lot to do. There are these young people who are amazing, who are like so organized, so brilliantly like doing stuff, and they're doing it in the poetry, all kinds of worlds, and there's just room for overlapping worlds. There's always room for things to improve. I believe that there's always room for things to improve. It doesn't always happen, but there is room for that, and there's the possibility, and that's what I believe in. So that keeps me going. It's called Incantation for Black Lives to Remain in Focus After the Outrage Fades. With gratitude to community of writers and the BIPOC writing community's Carrie Marr. Oh, wise one, we call on your essence. We cleave to justice, but find only feather pillows after the owl's flight, a shifting enemy. We seek, O Mother, a path to prevent more deaths, more suffering. Let not our heart's desires immolate on scattered alliances fanned by misbegotten echoes of promises already broken. This time, let the sword strike at the root to end this senseless cycle. And that's that poem, inspired by the events of last summer. That was from last summer, but so many things going on, and but yeah.
That was Yeva Johnson. As I've mentioned, we're taking October off as far as new episodes go. Check out our archives wherever you get podcasts to find more than 170 episodes to listen to. Until November, music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis MacDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 160 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review our show so we can reach even more folks. We love email. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, keep dreaming, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.